this session, we're going to talk about configuring trends. Now, we've worked with trends in previous sessions. We've viewed trends, we've created trend graphs, and we saved them permanently in the system. But we've always worked with enabled trends. In other words, we navigate to the accounting department. We've always looked at trends that were on this enabled list. In other words, the controller is already gathering and storing trend data. But what about points that are on the disabled points list? Let's go ahead and take a look at the discharge temp. Whenever you see a point listed on the disabled points list, it simply means we haven't enabled it for trending. Now, when we go to the view, we see the message, this trend is not enabled. Web Control cannot plot a graph because there is no trend data in the controller. Let's change that. I'm going to go to the Enable Disable tab, and I'm going to enable the trend log. And when I do, you'll see that there's several options that appear underneath. The first one is how often we want to sample data. In this case, we're going to sample data every 5 minutes. Now, what we could also do, or we could do instead rather, is we could say sample on change of value. Instead of gathering data every 5 minutes, simply gather the data whenever the discharge air temperature changes by more than 1 degree. And obviously, we can change this value. We're going to go ahead and sample every 5 minutes. We can specify how much memory we want allocated for this particular trend, and notice that because I'm at a point level, it can be different for every single point in the controller. We're going to go ahead and stick with the default of 288. And just as an FYI, 288 times 5 minutes is 24 hours worth of trends. So that means we're going to store 24 hours worth of trends in this controller that we can plot on the graph. Now, we can also clear all of the existing trend data out of the module for this point by clicking the reset button. Okay? So I went ahead and did that. We have 0 trend samples on it. When we click OK, we're going to start gathering trend data every 5 minutes for the discharge air temperature. Now, if I wanted to, I could tell Web Control, stop when full. In other words, once we get to the 288 sample, no longer gather new data. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to allow the controller to overwrite the oldest trend data once it gets to 288 samples. So we're going to have sort of a moving window of 24 hours where we can plot our discharge air temperature. We can also enable the trend log to gather trends only at specific times or dates. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick with the default, this sliding 24-hour window. Now, the last thing we can do is enable trend historian. We're going to talk about that in a different training session. But just be aware that enabling trend historian will gather data in the controller that will then be dumped into the hard drive of Web Control, saved permanently. We'll talk about that in a different session. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And we now have enabled our trend log. Went ahead and viewed the trend graph. Obviously, we haven't gathered any data yet, but the important point is that now the discharge air temperature is in fact on the enabled list. Maybe an hour from now, 2 hours from now, 3 hours from now, we'll have enough data so that we have something plotted. The important thing is the user can now come in and view this information, and you've learned how to set up and enable a particular point for trending.